We consume it in our morning coffee. It hides inside our savory sauces, our daily breads, our soft drinks, and our grandest celebrations. Today, the average human consumes dozens of pounds of it every single year. It is cheap, ubiquitous, and seemingly harmless. But beneath its pristine, white appearance lies a history of deep complexity and profound human cost. For over 1,000 years, this single molecule, sucrose, was one of the most coveted substances on Earth. It was treated as a rare medicine, a symbol of royal status, and a driver of global commerce. To satisfy the world's sweet tooth, entire islands were cleared of their ancient forests. Great empires fought brutal wars over small Caribbean territories, and millions of human beings were transported across the Atlantic in chains. This is not just the story of a food ingredient. This is the history of how a tropical grass shaped modern capitalism, rewrote the demographics of the Americas, and changed human biology forever. Our story begins in the dense, mist-shrouded rainforests of New Guinea, roughly 10,000 years ago. Here, the indigenous people of these islands domesticated a tall, fibrous grass known scientifically as Saccharum officinarum. To these early agriculturalists, the grass was not used to produce granules. Instead, it was chewed raw. People would break open the tough outer stalk to suck out the sweet, watery sap inside. In New Guinea's early folklore, sugarcane was highly revered, sometimes appearing in creation myths as the source of humanity itself. Through ancient maritime trade and migrations, the sweet plant slowly migrated across the Pacific and Southeast Asia. By approximately 1000 BCE, it had reached the fertile river valleys of India. But sugarcane had a major physical limitation. Once harvested, the sweet juice inside the stalk begins to ferment and sour within 24 hours. For thousands of years, sugarcane could only be enjoyed where it grew. It could not be stored, and it could not be easily transported over long distances. That changed during the Gupta Empire in India, around 350 CE. In northern India, early agriculturalists and food technicians developed a revolutionary process. They discovered that by crushing the cane, extracting the juice, boiling it down slowly over open fires, and agitating the concentrated syrup, the liquid would crystallize into solid, stable granules. They called these sweet, gritty crystals sharkara, a Sanskrit word meaning gravel or grit. This is the etymological ancestor of our modern word, sugar. Large chunks of these crystals were called kandaka, which would eventually give us the word candy. For the first time in human history, sweetness was portable. It could be packed into bags, loaded onto caravans, and shipped across oceans without spoiling. As trade networks expanded, the powerful empires of the ancient world began to catch wind of this mysterious substance. In 510 BCE, when the Persian Emperor Darius I invaded the Indus Valley, his soldiers encountered the plant. They noted with astonishment that there was a reed which gives honey without bees. 2 centuries later, in 326 BCE, Alexander the Great's general, Nearchus, sailed down the Indus River and made a similar observation, describing a plant that produced honey, although there are no bees. Buddhist monks, traveling along trade routes, took sugar crystallization technology to China. By the 7th century, the Tang dynasty Emperor Taizong became so interested in the process that he sent a mission to India to study sugarcane cultivation and sugar refining firsthand. Yet, for the ancient Mediterranean world, sugar remained a rare, exotic curiosity. It was imported in tiny quantities and treated not as food, but as a luxury medicine. The Roman physician Dioscorides described it as a gravel-like substance that was beneficial for the stomach, kidneys, and bladder. For Europe, sugar was a mythic luxury, a sweet dust from the far corners of the earth. But as the classical world collapsed, a new empire would take sugar and carry it to the shores of the Mediterranean. With the rise of Islam in the 7th century, the cultivation of sugarcane entered a new, highly productive era. Arab traders and agriculturalists had encountered the plant in Persia, where they learned the complex arts of refining it. As the caliphates expanded across the Middle East, North Africa, and Southern Europe, they brought sugarcane with them. But growing sugarcane in the arid climates of the Middle East and the Mediterranean required massive amounts of water. To solve this, Arab engineers deployed highly advanced irrigation techniques, including underground aqueducts known as sugarcane cultivation spread to Egypt, Syria, Cyprus, Sicily, and Spain. Under Islamic rule, sugar transitioned from a rare medicinal curiosity to a highly organized industry. Yet, it remained immensely labor-intensive. Harvesting sugarcane required cutting the heavy stalks by hand under a scorching sun, crushing them quickly, and boiling the juice in massive, fuel-hungry boiling houses. It was a process that demanded capital, land, and an immense amount of physical labor. In the 11th century, European crusaders arrived in the Holy Land. Among the many novelties they discovered was this sweet salt, as they called it. When they returned to Europe, they brought back a taste for sugar. Venice quickly recognized the immense profitability of this trade. Venetian merchants established themselves as the primary middlemen of the sugar trade, importing the refined crystals from Egypt and selling them to the royal courts of Western Europe at astronomical prices. By the late Middle Ages, sugar was the ultimate status symbol in Europe. It was so expensive that it was kept in locked, ornate boxes, with the keys held by the lady of the house. Royal chefs used sugar as a spice, throwing it onto meat and fish alongside black pepper, ginger, and nutmeg. Even more remarkably, they used it as a structural material. At royal banquets, guests were entertained by subtleties, elaborate sculptures of castles, mythical beasts, and religious scenes made entirely of hardened sugar paste. To eat sugar was to consume wealth itself. But Europe's climate was too cold to grow the tropical plant, and the lands of the Mediterranean were running out of water and firewood to boil the syrup. To feed their growing appetite, European explorers looked to the west, into the vast, uncharted Atlantic. In the 15th century, Portuguese and Spanish navigators began exploring the islands off the coast of West Africa. On Madeira, the Azores, and the Canary Islands, they found fertile volcanic soil and a warm, wet climate perfectly suited for sugarcane. It was here that the Portuguese developed a new economic model, the large-scale plantation system. They cleared the native forests to plant sugarcane and brought in enslaved laborers to work the fields. By the late 15th century, Madeira had become Europe's largest producer of sugar. But these Atlantic islands were just the staging ground. In 1493, on his second voyage to the New World, Christopher Columbus packed sugarcane stalks from the Canary. He planted them in the fertile soil of Hispaniola, in what is today the Dominican Republic and Haiti. The plant did not just grow, it flourished. The European powers quickly realized that the Americas possessed nearly limitless land for sugar cultivation. But they faced a critical problem: labor. Sugarcane cultivation was brutal, hazardous, and physically exhausting. The native populations of the Caribbean, devastated by European diseases and forced labor, were rapidly dying out. To fuel their expanding plantations, European powers turned to West Africa, initiating one of the most tragic and horrific chapters in human history: the transatlantic slave trade. Historians estimate that between the 16th and 19th centuries, over 12 million Africans were forcibly taken from their homes and shipped across the Atlantic. Of those 12 million, more than 4 million were sent to the sugar plantations of Portuguese Brazil, and over 3 million were sent to the sugar colonies of the Caribbean, such as British Jamaica, French Saint-Domingue, and Spanish Cuba. Sugar was the primary engine of the transatlantic slave trade. It was a crop that literally consumed human lives. The work on a sugar plantation was relentless and industrial in its discipline. During the harvest season, plantations operated 24 hours a day. Enslaved workers cut the razor-sharp cane stalks by hand, carrying heavy bundles to the mills. In the mills, the cane had to be processed within 24 hours. If the cut cane sat too long, the sucrose inside would degrade into glucose and fructose, which did not crystallize well. This strict biological clock drove plantation owners to push their laborers to the absolute physical limit, working them through the night. Enslaved workers fed the cane into heavy iron rollers to squeeze out the juice. If a tired worker's hand or clothing got caught in the rollers, the overseer kept a hatchet nearby to sever the limb before the worker's entire body was pulled in and crushed. From the mill, the raw juice was funneled into the boiling house. Here, in a hot, humid atmosphere thick with steam, workers stirred boiling sugarcane syrup in a series of massive copper cauldrons. The heat was intense, and accidental splashes of the sticky, boiling liquid caused horrific, life-threatening burns. The physical toll of this labor was staggering. On the sugar plantations of the Caribbean and Brazil, the life expectancy of an enslaved worker upon arrival was a mere 7 to 10 years. It was cheaper for plantation owners to work their laborers to death and purchase new enslaved people than it was to sustain their lives. The profits, however, were immense. Sugar was dubbed white gold by European merchants. It built grand estates in England, funded the French maritime ports of Bordeaux and Nantes, and laid the financial foundations of the modern banking and insurance industries. By the 18th century, the massive scale of Atlantic production had driven the price of sugar down. It was no longer a luxury reserved exclusively for royalty. In Great Britain, sugar became a staple of the working-class diet. As the Industrial Revolution forced millions of workers into factories for long, grueling shifts, sugar provided a cheap, rapid source of calories. The British sweet tooth was born. Workers drank bitter black tea, sweetened with sugar imported from the Caribbean, giving them the energy to operate the looms and steam engines that built the British Empire. But sugar was more than a dietary staple. It was a geopolitical weapon. By the late 1700s, the French colony of Saint-Domingue, present-day Haiti, was the richest colony on Earth. It produced nearly half of the world's sugar, all of it built on the backs of nearly 500,000 enslaved people. In 1791, the enslaved population of Saint-Domingue rose in a massive coordinated rebellion. Led by Toussaint Louverture, they fought off the French, British, and Spanish empires in a brutal decade-long war. In 1804, they declared independence, establishing Haiti as the world's first free black republic. The Haitian Revolution shattered the global sugar market. The supply of Caribbean sugar plummeted, and prices soared. In Europe, the loss of Caribbean sugar was exacerbated by the Napoleonic Wars. In 1806, the British Navy established a strict blockade of continental Europe, cutting France off from its remaining colonies and leaving European shelves empty of sugar. Desperate for a solution, Napoleon Bonaparte turned to a scientific breakthrough that had been quietly developing in Germany. Decades earlier, in 1747, German chemist Andreas Marggraf had discovered that the common beet, Beta vulgaris, contained sucrose that was chemically identical to that of sugarcane. His student, Franz Achard, subsequently built the first industrial beet sugar factory in Silesia. In 1811, Napoleon issued a historic decree. He ordered that 32,000 hectares of land in France be dedicated to growing sugar beets. He established schools to study the extraction process and funded the construction of hundreds of domestic sugar factories. Within just a few years, Europe was producing millions of pounds of sugar domestically, entirely independent of tropical sugarcane and colonial trade routes. The monopoly of the tropical sugarcane plant was broken forever. Sugar was now a crop that could be grown in both the tropical colonies of the South and the temperate fields of the North. In the 20th century, sugar transitioned from a scarce commodity to an industrial flood. With the gradual abolition of slavery in the late 19th century and the rapid mechanization of agriculture, sugar became incredibly cheap to produce. Food manufacturers discovered that sugar was not just a sweetener. It was a preservative, a texturizer, and a highly effective way to make low-cost, processed foods taste delicious. By the mid-20th century, sugar was no longer a treat. It was an invisible foundation of the industrial food system. In the 1970s, a new competitor emerged: high-fructose corn syrup, made from subsidized surplus corn in the United States. This liquid sweetener was even cheaper than cane or beet sugar, and it quickly found its way into nearly every processed food product on supermarket shelves, from sodas to salad dressings. But as global sugar consumption reached unprecedented heights, a quiet medical crisis was brewing. In 1972, a British nutritionist named Dr. John Yudkin published a prophetic and deeply controversial book titled Pure, White and Deadly. Based on years of laboratory research, Yudkin warned that the massive increase in sugar consumption was directly linked to a rise in dental decay, obesity, diabetes, and coronary heart disease. Yudkin's findings threatened a multi-billion-dollar global industry. At the time, another theory was gaining dominance in the scientific community, championed by American physiologist Ancel Keys. Keys argued that dietary fat, particularly saturated fat, was the primary cause of heart disease. The sugar industry seized on Keys' research. Declassified documents have since revealed that trade groups paid scientists to downplay the link between sugar and heart health. In 1965, the Sugar Research Foundation paid several Harvard scientists, including Mark Hegsted and Frederick Stare, to publish a literature review in the prestigious New England Journal of Medicine. The review, which did not disclose its industry funding, concluded that there was no doubt that reducing cholesterol and saturated fat was the only dietary intervention needed to prevent heart disease, while downplaying the role of sucrose. Dr. Yudkin was publicly ridiculed, his research dismissed, and his academic reputation severely damaged. For the next 3 decades, the food industry and government guidelines promoted low-fat diets. But to make these fat-free products palatable, manufacturers loaded them with sugar. The result was a global health epidemic. Rates of type 2 diabetes, childhood obesity, and metabolic syndrome skyrocketed across the globe. Only in the 21st century did modern nutritional science finally vindicate John Yudkin, recognizing that the overconsumption of added sugars is indeed a major driver of modern metabolic disease. Today, sugar is no longer a luxury kept under lock and key. It is a constant presence in our lives, a silent companion to the human experience. For thousands of years, we pursued this molecule across oceans and continents. We built empires to secure it, waged wars to control it, and enslaved millions to harvest it. We succeeded in making the world sweet, but in doing so, we have inherited a complex legacy, one that continues to challenge our health, our economies, and our societies. The next time you stir a spoonful of white crystals into your tea, or open a sweetened drink, remember that you are holding more than just a source of calories. You are holding a molecule that rewrote the map of the world. The history of sugar is, in many ways, the history of the modern world.